Last week, the Infantry Combat Overhaul was released.
Nice.
And almost instantaneously, Steam reviews, Discords, and subreddits all spontaneously combusted. Squad was review bombed, dropping recent reviews to as low as 40%.
Now that's a lot of damage!
Squad discords and subreddits blew up with criticism of the ICO, which dominated the forums, all while almost no reaction from OWI. In all of this negativity, there is a general sentiment that the ICO is killing Squad, a once beloved game being strangled to death by fedora-wearing Redditor milsimmers, who are also bad at the game and also noobs. The ICO is apparently going to make Squad a dead game and cause a mass exodus of the Squad community. So, are they right? Is Squad crumbling from within? Today, I want to respond to some of the most common anti-ICO arguments, and hopefully dispel the narrative that Squad is being ruined by the ICO. While I was researching for this video, Moydog released a video titled Players are Review Bombing Squad's Update, where he goes into some of the most common complaints about the ICO. However, I was disappointed that he seemed to not take some of the criticism seriously, brushing a lot of it off as veterans and competitive players just being ridiculous.
Guys, don't worry, it's okay. It's okay. It's all the comp Squad players that are upset that they can no longer lean spam. It's okay. We just got it. They're unemployed. Their moms and dads will come home soon, then they'll have to get off the computer. It's okay.
Moydog has since been lambasted with tweets, YouTube comments, and Discord shit-talking. So in order to avoid the same fate as Moydog, I want to lay down my keyboard and have a heart-to-heart. You have to sympathize with players who prefer pre-V6 gameplay because to them, their game was nuked into nothingness overnight. Sure, they knew it was coming, but that doesn't make it any easier. And before you say, well, they can just go play COD, where they can run and gun all they want. Well, that's the thing. COD isn't anything like Squad Pre-V6. It was a teamwork-oriented game with fast, twitch shooter mechanics. There is no replacement out there for these players. They either have to suck it up and deal with the game they now believe is ruined, or move on to other games. And so I genuinely do feel sorry for them. So if there are any people who are anti-ICO watching, just know that I feel for you. Anyway, let's go to smashing your opinions. Well, might as well start off with a banger. Let's talk about the noodle arms. God have mercy on my comment section. Roll the quotes.
10 out of 10 game before patch 6.0, but the new aiming and suppression system has made the game brutal and pretty not fun to play. Not being able to hit the broadside of a barn after jogging for 15 feet, or being useless for 20 seconds after a bullet flies over your head 50 meters away has pretty much ruined this absolute gem of a game.
I'm not trying to rattle any nerves here at the start of my video, but I genuinely feel that many pre-V6 fans do not understand the adjustments they need to make to account for the ICO. In other words, I think they are failing because they aren't adjusting to the changes, not because the ICO is just that bad. Let me show you my work before you type that comment. With the ICO, there's a new mechanic called deviation. See those two little pips at the bottom of my screen? As they get farther apart, I gain more deviation. The less stamina, the more deviation. There will always be at least a tiny amount of deviation, even if you are standing still, aimed, and with full stamina. The only way to get zero deviation and to become, quote, fully accurate is with full stamina, while scoped, standing still, and holding the shift key, which will make your character hold his breath. Then you'll be able to fire with absolutely no sway, at least for a little. So yeah, that's a big change. But let's do some testing. It takes 3 to 4 seconds from walking to aiming to become fully accurate with a 4x scope with full stamina. That's quite a long time. But notice how little deviation actually is at the bottom of my screen. Let's try again. this time acting as if I'm in a real situation and I need to start firing as soon as possible. I missed the first shot due to deviation, but then I am almost fully accurate by the second shot. I can accurately engage within 1 to 2 seconds while holding shift, stabilizing my weapon, and by the third shot, I'm fully accurate. Granted, this is a clean environment. No one is shooting back at me. But the argument that you can't hit anything because the sway is so bad is, in IT terms, a user error. This is what I think those players who are complaining about not being able to hit anything, even while full stamina, are actually doing. In fact, there's some clips of people with these complaints doing just that. While you move, you gain deviation. That's their first mistake. Don't move while firing anymore. Secondly, full auto is very unmanageable in the ICO, only intended for close encounters. But if they simply kept a full stamina bar, held shift, and fired slowly and accurately, they would have no trouble hitting their shots. For those complaining about not being able to hit anything without stamina, the answer is obvious, and I know this may sound pretentious, but slow down. Get full stamina before you get in the fight. Don't move while you shoot, and try to fire slowly and accurately. Still not satisfied? You prefer maybe a faster playstyle? Well, let me introduce to you something seemingly novel to the eyes of a pre-V6 fan: one-time scopes. See, the meta before the ICO was clear: 4-time scopes whenever you can, and just hip fire for close range. One-time scopes such as iron sights and close combat optics were only marginally useful, and the negatives far outweighed the positives. With the ICO, that's changed. Hate that you can't aim when out of stamina? With the one-times, you can do just that. Point firing doesn't have enough range for you, and hate how long it takes for you to become accurate with the 4-times? Great, use a red dot. If you want to have a faster paced playstyle, one-times are the best way for you to be successful. All of this is under the assumption that these players simply don't understand or are unwilling to adapt to the ICO's changes. I think the ICO was just kind of dropped on a lot of players, and they therefore do not know how the ICO affects gameplay. But what about the players that understand perfectly how the ICO works and how to adapt, but just don't like the new gameplay? They just don't like how long it takes to get on target. They just don't like how slow they are. Well, prepare for my final argument. Why did OWI make these changes in the first place? OWI introduced slower gameplay through changes like movement speed, deviation, and suppression. Why? The answer is twofold. 1. Slowing down the gameplay will give players more time to think, plan, and execute collaboratively. And 2, to crack down on the run and gun nature of Squad. All of these effects you are experiencing are in service to attempting to punish individualistic playstyles and promote more teamwork through giving player opportunities to work together. Does the ICO accomplish these objectives? I think it's at least successful at point 2 in terms of combat. Sure, lone wolves are still valuable because they find enemy radios and halves, but overall individualistic players are not effective in combat in the ICO. As for the first point, I think it's too soon to tell. Players need to soak in this update. They need to learn how it works and adjust accordingly. I will say in my own games, I have noticed more cooperation in firefights. There's a lot of "I'm suppressing," "push," or "cover me, I'm moving" going on, and I really enjoy that. All said, if you understand the adaptations you can make to be successful and still don't enjoy that, and you understand OWI's thinking behind their design decisions and disagree with those design decisions, that is completely fine. We can continue the conversation from there like true gentlemen. That said, and I'm sorry, but there's no polite way to say this, I feel that a large part of the negative reactions are almost knee-jerk in nature, based in an unwillingness to adapt, or even worse, in ignorance of how the ICO actually works and what they can do to adapt to the changes and be successful. This is OWI's fault though. With such a massive change, I think they had an obligation to show players how the ICO would change the game and the new mechanics involved, and they did a poor job of doing so. There's one more thing before we move on. This word keeps popping up: random. The gunplay in Squad is now apparently random. Some players are seriously suggesting that the ICO's gunplay is random, as if it's the flip of a coin whether or not you win a firefight, as if positioning, stamina conservation, and plain old aiming skill just does not matter anymore. This comes from ignorance of how the ICO, specifically the deviation mechanic, actually works. They believe the gunplay is random because they attempted to play the ICO how they played 5.0 Squad, and they're getting flattened. They attempted to go from full-on sprinting to firing full auto, and of course were inaccurate. So therefore, the gunplay of the ICO is now random and just up to luck. As if they couldn't have just slowed down, preserved their stamina, and single-fired their way to victory. I think the general consensus on suppression is that it is needed in a game like Squad. I think most players believe it should be a viable tactic, but people simply disagree on how powerful it should be. Pre-V6 fans, as I'll be calling them from now on, will complain that suppression is too powerful, claiming that anyone who fires first will always win because just by shooting randomly, they've now gained a massive advantage over their opponent. The victim's screen is now blurred and swaying like a boat in a storm, and can be easily dispatched by the offender. I think what matters in this argument is first and foremost, does suppression accomplish its goals from OWI? Is suppression a strong tactic that can be used both to slow down and subdue enemy offensives, and also to suppress defenders for a decisive push? I think the answer is an unwavering yes. Players have been quick to understand and use suppression to their advantage in the ICO so far, at least in my experience. The tactic of fire and maneuver, for example, when an element of the squad suppresses while the other pushes, is not complicated or difficult to pull off in this update. You simply ask players to suppress and take some guys with you and push, and I have seen it over and over in the games I've played. In fact, I've seen suppression used more on the offensive to facilitate pushes than to bog down enemy pushes on the defense, but I'm sure that can change. The argument of suppression being too powerful, I think, is more of a failure on those players than the actual suppression mechanic. They act as if once they are suppressed, they're absolutely helpless. They hunker down in some bush and inevitably get pushed and killed by enemies. The reality of the matter is that suppressed players can do something about getting suppressed. The first is to fire back, suppressing the enemy. OWI intended to simulate the principle of fire superiority, where the side with the most firepower can overwhelm the enemies and pin their opponents down, thus allowing opportunities for pushes. I think this is simulated well in firefights, and if you can't fire back, you can reposition, then fire. Sometimes you may get killed because you're out of position and facing multiple enemies, but this leads back to how the suppression overhaul incentivizes teamwork. As simple as it can make it, apes together strong. 5 stick better than 1 stick, and grug with big stick better than grug with small stick. I think this is pretty intuitive, and players will catch on and attempt to push together more often so they will have better chances of success. I do want to concede at one point. Every so often in matches, 2 players will catch each other in an open field, start spraying at each other, and now that they're both suppressed, neither side can hit for shit, and they just pray their bullets are luckier than others. This is pretty silly in my opinion, and if there is a way to get rid of those silly situations without sacrificing in other areas, I think they should do it. However, I do believe these situations are fairly rare and only happen to me once, maybe every couple of games. One of the more popular predictions from pre-V6 fans is that because of the intense suppression mechanics combined with the increased accuracy of slower or idle players, the ICO will create a bushwookie or camper meta, whereas on a micro level, people are more likely to just hide in foliage and prone behind obstacles to win firefights, and on a macro level, will result in a meta where no one pushes, both sides stalemating and trying to get the other side to push against their stalwart defenses. I think this is also a silly argument. Let's tackle the micro level first. Bushwookies and pro campers were a nuisance in version 5, and they are still a nuisance in version 6. Players who hide in bushes, prone behind obstacles, they're going to get some kills. This can be adapted to, however. The key is, again, ape together strong. The way you dealt with them in 5.0 is the same as how you deal with them in 6.0, sticking with your squad. You may get shot by the guy in the bush, but then your teammate can trade you by avenging your death. If the little guy is behind a stone wall or in a building, or if you just don't see him, a simple grenade will either kill him outright or suppress him enough for you to push and clear him out. Once the threat is gone, a medic can revive you and there's no harm done. In fact, I would argue that due to the new suppression overhaul, you now have an additional tool to rid out the buggers. Sure, they may get an easy kill or two at first, but once you know their general area, they're in for deep trouble. One could argue that while prone campers and bush Wookiees may be more accurate due to them being prepared and ready to shoot against unprepared moving attackers, this is counterbalanced by good team play and utilization of the new suppression mechanics. On a macro level, I do not agree that stalemates and super fobs are the new meta. I think this is subjective, but this comes mostly from my personal experience across all 8 playtests and now quite a few matches in version 6. In almost every game I played, people are not simply camping in a bush and building super fobs, daring the other enemy to push their impenetrable fortress. Instead, players are always attacking, actually to a fault. In fact, I've experienced more games where we lose because no one is defending in the ICO than I have of a stalemate between two sides. I've seen at this point countless times where players were able to successfully leverage suppression and good team play to overwhelm the defenders. And when both sides had roughly equal amounts of firepower and there is a stalemate, the siege can be broken by a well-placed flank. The reality is, suppression goes both ways. You can use suppression offensively to cover pushes and debilitate enemy defenders held up inside of strongpoints, and you can use it defensively to bog down enemy pushes. So while an entrenched enemy may be more difficult to deal with in 6.0, there are also numerous new ways to crack that egg. V6 made defenders stronger while also giving attackers more tools to work with. Mortar fire support from vehicles, and machine guns now cause massive suppression that can make the defenders into lemmings, while smokes are thrown by infantry and shot out by mortars, blinding them as well. Then a push is all it takes to root them out. Not to mention commander abilities will be very useful as well. Or a simple, well-timed flank can take an entrenched defense by surprise, just as it did often in 5.0. In summary, while I can agree defenders get a buff in this update, attackers also got new tools to break enemy defenses. Rewarded for shooting at bushes. This one is just a complete misrepresentation of what suppression not only is in squad, but in real life. No one is rewarded for shooting at bushes. No one is unloading into every bush he sees, and even if there were people doing that, it would be incredibly inefficient due to them running out of ammo in like 2 minutes. Secondly, they'd be giving up their element of surprise, which is a powerful tool, especially in the ICO. Players are actually firing at where they think the enemy is. They may fire into tree lines, into towns or fields, but they aren't just shooting randomly, hoping to give someone a 3 to 4 second suppression debuff. What good does that do for them? And lastly, firing to see where enemies are is literally a real-life tactic. It's called recon by fire, where you fire at where you think the enemies are to provoke a response. Maybe they reposition and you can kill them while they're transitioning. Maybe they fire back and you know where they are now. But in order to effectively use suppression, or recon by fire for that matter, you have to have some inkling of where the enemy is. The ICO will get old in X amount of time. It's just convenient that every time they give a deadline to when people will get bored of the update, and that update comes and people are still playing and enjoying the update, that the deadline suddenly gets pushed farther into the future. They said people would get bored in playtest 1 by playtest 3, and lo and behold, when people still kept hopping on that date, all of a sudden it became, oh well, they'll get bored by playtest 6. And so the cycle just continues. Because it's just impossible that some people genuinely enjoy this update and will keep coming back to play it, right? I figure it's important to counterbalance the other side of the crazy spectrum and try and make the point that while I think the ICO does a lot of great things, it does not fix all of Squad's issues. For one, the ICO does not fix macro strategy. People are still stupid as ever. No one defending. Super fobs in the middle of nowhere. Stupid, aggressive habs that keep getting overrun 2 minutes after they're put up. And it's all still there. That is why I think both vehicles and the spawn systems need an overhaul as well to make them align and synergize with the infantry combat overhaul. Lastly, I will admit that the floaty gameplay, while mitigatable, is not ideal. Unfortunately, I do not know if there really is another way, but until OWI can think of a better solution, I think this is the deal worth taking. And now, it's my turn. I want to explain my bias, because everyone has a bias. If someone tells you otherwise, they're lying, and they most definitely have a bias. My bias is that I am pro ICO, but I did my best to be good faith to the pre-V6 fans side in my video. This update is so divisive because OWI has effectively split the squad community, creating two separate communities who want two very different games. Pre-V6 fans have effectively lost the game they loved overnight. At the same time, V6 fans have had to deal with their game's vision being diluted for years by shooter trends and arcade gameplay. But what if OWI tries to find a middle ground between these two communities? In my opinion, that would be the worst possible option. If OWI tries to appease both sides by creating a mix of V5 and V6 gameplay, OWI will simply dissatisfy both parties and effectively turn Squad into a visionless game. If they want to maintain a vision and general direction over Squad, I'm afraid they must pick a side. Pick a version and stick to it. I know it's a hard choice to make. My personal opinion on the ICO is that while it certainly had a rough launch and desperately needs some optimization, I still believe it has the potential to make Squad a more team-oriented experience. The update just came out, and we just need to allow players to adapt and for the drama to settle down before we can objectively analyze the effects of the ICO has had on the general Squad population. I do think, however, that OWI has expected this backlash and will probably simply lock down the hatches and weather the storm rather than buckle to the criticism. They seem pretty adamant on where they want Squad to go, judging from their devlogs, and it's hard to see them abandoning that new vision over some pretty predictable backlash. So, we're at the end of the video, and we still have not answered our question. Is the ICO ruining Squad? I think the answer is unsatisfying. It is certainly ruining Squad for many of the pre-V6 fans who enjoyed Squad as it was, while on the other hand, pro V6 players think V6 put Squad on the right track, and that the game is better for it. The simple answer is no, the ICO did not ruin Squad. It just changed Squad into a completely different game. Thanks for watching.